Okay. Okay, so I was just going to leave an opportunity, just if anyone wanted to, or really probably the appellant, but just to, whether there was anything other than what was set out in the statement of common ground with regard to socio-economic and environmental benefits that you wanted to draw my attention to or have a discussion about.
I don't think that we need to go into that in any great detail, madam. I mean, I think you mentioned earlier that it might be helpful to list the benefits, and I'm happy to do that for you. Obviously, first and foremost, provision of affordable housing in an area where both on a district-wide basis and on a local basis, there's a manifest and urgent need. On a district-wide basis, there's a recent appeal decision that we've drawn attention to in our papers, which says that the delivery shortfall is 1,281 affordable homes. The council's only running at about 25% of need being addressed, and the inspector in that case, Inspector Woodward, described the situation as a persistent and meaningful under-delivery of affordable housing over the past 10 years. So that itself is a more than regrettable circumstance. As far as local need is concerned, again, there's never been any dispute between us and the council. The council's housing team always supported the proposal because it would address an identified local need. And as I say, the conclusions of our housing needs assessment rather were always accepted. The figures that I mentioned earlier from that document, just to correct slightly, 927 households on the housing register. I may have said something slightly higher than that before. That's the figure that the HNA refers to at para 3.9, and it identified 45 people or households with a local connection within the study area, and that very much squared with the conclusions of the HNA from the extensive survey that was conducted. And obviously part and parcel of the evidence and the reason that the council has acknowledged no breach and indeed accordance with policy HOU 4 is that there is no suitable alternative site within the area studied. So this is it. This is the only game in town at the moment. So that's the first benefit, and we'd say a very substantial weight to be attributed to it. The second, and equally, and the council agrees, very substantial weight to be attributed to this is the adoption of passive house principles. I don't want to go back over any of the evidence on that. I'm sure I don't need to. Just to remind you, in terms of the framework, could you have a look, please, at para 134 of the framework also in due course, or now if it's available? That talks about significant weight being accorded to innovative designs which promote high levels of sustainability. And obviously this is not sustainability in the sense of getting on buses and the like, but it is sustainability in the sense of preservation of energy and reduction of carbon emissions and so on and so forth. And then the paragraphs of the framework that I mentioned earlier, 152 and 158, essentially what they say, reading them together, the planning system should support developments that contribute to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And then it specifically says even small scale projects can provide a valuable contribution. And obviously that's all allied to 134 and the significant weight, effectively policy, as to how much weight should be accorded to those considerations. And then the other matters that I refer to, I'm not going to pretend that they belong in the same category as the first two benefits, but they undoubtedly have their place to be borne in mind in any necessary planning balance. And there are a number of them. Firstly, the appeal scheme is locationally sustainable for the scale of development proposed, and that takes account of local facilities and public transport routes, and so on and so forth. Secondly, there are some highway improvements, not just the access, but also footpath widening. The access will probably bring speeds down to some extent, and that may even reduce the noise, not that we've sought to calculate that. But there are other highway improvements, footpath widening, tactile paving, and so on in the local area that will be facilitated. Next, the usual economic benefits that a new housing scheme brings along, and they're also agreed to be biodiversity net gain benefits. And obviously we talked a little about landscaping schemes and a hedge, and those are all potentially features that will further contribute to that. And then finally, worth bearing in mind in the benefits side of the scale, that there is really barely any local opposition to the appeal scheme. Of course, the council is opposed, you know that, and the parish put in a letter objecting primarily, it seems, on highway grounds. But otherwise, I think it's something like 97% of local residents were supportive of the scheme. And that's really quite a large number of people who chose to take the time to write into the council to support the scheme, many of them noting the substantial local need for affordable housing, and perhaps knowing or being related to or being friends with some of the people who are in local need and would want to have the opportunity to live in one of these properties. And you might also note, if you haven't already, Madam, that some of the people who wrote in to support the appeal scheme are the immediate neighbours to the north and the south of the appeal scheme. So again, are they disturbed by the current noise to the extent that their circumstances are regarded as unacceptable? Obviously not. Are they disturbed by the possibility of a short terrace appearing on the appeal site? Again, obviously not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to come back on any of that?
Yes, thank you. I think obviously just sort of some of the benefits sort of identified there. I think I'd just sort of obviously say that the highway improvements are necessary in order to make the development acceptable in sort of transport terms and highways terms, albeit I think obviously others will utilise it, but nonetheless it's necessary for this particular development. In terms of local residents responding, I think perhaps just to clarify, I think it was reported that 97% of residents were in favour. I think it's actually 97% of the respondents to it rather than actually those residents. Yes. Yeah, that's fine. It was just to clarify. Yeah, I think, you know, obviously a note paragraph 34 of the NPPF, obviously that same paragraph sort of refers to design, and obviously that's the council's issue at this time, but also, you know, acknowledging passive design standards. We've already sort of covered that, as you know, in our comments previously. Obviously, in terms of innovative designs, we don't have a design in front of us necessarily. We just have a proposal to sort of comply with passive house standards or principles, I should say. But I think we've already captured that in terms of the way we'd afford that, as we've set out earlier. But other than that, I don't have any other comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that concludes the questions that I wanted to ask. Obviously, we're going to go on to talk about the unilateral and the undertaking, but was there anything else that anyone felt hadn't been covered, any points that had not been made that you wanted to pick up on? No? Okay, good. So yeah, so that then takes us on to conditions and obligations. So if we deal with the obligation first. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I know I'd got them because I remember looking at them, but I didn't print them. Didn't print them.
I can also have a copy of the current infrastructure list of that. That's going to be relevant to copies of others if needed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want, I think I've had a look through the undertaking and I looked through what I had in terms of from the council. So do you want to just go through what your concerns are then, or however you want to phrase it?
Thank you very much. Yes, just to touch on quickly, you've got the unilateral, the Section 106 agreement, which covers the affordable housing element,
Yes.
which is what we had agreed. We were discussing with the council during the course of it, and it became quite clear quite early on that we were going to be unable to get the county council to be signatories to a Section 106 agreement in time for this hearing.
Okay.
So we advanced them separately.
That's fine.
So nothing in relation to affordable housing is a matter of dispute.
No.
In terms of the third reason for refusal, the third reason for refusal referred to contributions towards education, open space and affordable housing provision requiring 106 agreement. The council had subsequently come back to say that an open space contribution was not actually required in support of this application. So there's no reference to it in any of the obligations that are before you. During the course of the planning appeal, the county council came back with a request in relation to contributions for education, where they had made a broadly similar one during the course of the planning application, and also a contribution for libraries, which had not been raised at any point before in the process. So the county council have a planning obligation strategy in draft, which I understand the consultation draft was published in 2016, but still hasn't been formally adopted, and they refer to the fact that they haven't, they're still bringing forward their SPD at the moment. So the question then is in relation to education as to whether they comply with paragraph 57 of the MPPF and regulation 122 of the community infrastructure levy regulations. So obviously those are that they should be necessary to make the development acceptable. They should be directly related to the development, and they should be fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. And they've requested a library contribution of £59 per person, totaling £2,802, an early years contribution for education for the equivalent to 2 places, no need for primary education contributions, and a secondary school contribution for around about 5 places, although they acknowledge that as the scheme isn't finalised yet, there isn't an exact figure to put to it, so they've set out their rationale to do it, or setting it out. So I suppose there are 2 points just in relation to the assessment of whether it meets the SIL tests. Obviously, the council has adopted SIL, the borough council rather than the county council. And the SIL detailed guidance states very clearly that SIL will be used to deliver strategic level infrastructure, and gives examples such as secondary schools and district level community facilities as things which are SIL are identified and meant to cover. I think you've just been passed a copy of the Borough Council's infrastructure list, which is October 21, which I understand is the latest list, which includes elements in it which are covering both education and library infrastructure. Now, it's certainly the case that the specific schools and libraries that are identified on the infrastructure list are not the same as the ones which have been put forward for contributions by the county council for expansion or enhancement. However, SIL contributions aren't ring-fenced by the infrastructure list. And the fact that SIL could potentially fund this infrastructure means that the Section 106 contribution towards either education or libraries can't meet the Regulation 122 tests.
This is because education is strategic infrastructure, which can and arguably should be covered by SIL. So I think it's quite a fundamental question as to whether it should apply and whether the SIL regulations should cover whether you can sort of cherry pick whether it applies to education contributions or not.
So have I got the SIL, your sort of SIL? I've got this, but there must be another document, SIL document, is there? I don't think I've seen anything. That's unless it's the question.
So I'm afraid I don't have a printed copy, but the East Cambridgeshire Community Infrastructure Detailed Guidance for Planning Applicants, October 2015 document is one that I've reviewed, which just set out what SIL is for, what it is meant to cover. Perhaps we can arrange for a copy of that to be provided to you.
Yeah, because what I sort of can. Yeah, because we can't have it both ways. You can't have education under SIL and then ask for a contribution, can you? That's your concern. Is it because this is supposed to just identify specific infrastructure rather than places? I suppose that's the difference, isn't it?
I mean, there are elements on here, such as libraries serving the Kennet development, which is the sort of the Newtown expansion in the east of the borough. And obviously, it's in their libraries which serve us geographical sort of area of the borough, which still is collecting from all development within the borough.
Yeah, so who this refers to, that's what you mentioned, currently in the process of preparing guidance in the form of a planning obligation strategy. And this will set out details for seeking Section 106 contributions.
Yes, it's my understanding that that hasn't been formally adopted yet. The 2016 draft is the latest version.
The County Council has been successful in demonstrating that they meet the requirements. They haven't given us any other details, though.
The justification there seems to be that they've been successful in achieving contributions on other sites.
But it might not have been disputed. That's the trouble. I mean, it's not that, especially on these smaller schemes, you don't tend to get it so much, do you? So really your concern is that you feel that you don't dispute the need that's identified, like there is a need arising from your development as has been set out by the County Council, but that you think the approach should be dealt with by SIL.
That under point 1, we have another point as well, just to run through.
Okay. I don't know whether the council have got a view on that, or you're looking to see.
No, I don't, if I'm completely honest. So we'd had some dialogue during the appeal, myself and Chris, just in terms of understanding of SIL and how that would work. The advice I was provided at the time is that obviously the SIL list identifies projects where SIL is channeled, essentially. It doesn't prevent the County Council applying for funding, but obviously there are no guarantees that that money will be available to them at the time if it's already been funneled and channeled to these, what I would assume to be priority projects. I don't know. So I guess it's about certainty.
Well, the trouble is this was approved in 2021, and what we don't know is what some of these may have now been, that's 2 years ago, well, 18 months ago.
Yes, and all we know is that obviously requisite infrastructure serving this development isn't, as far as I'm aware, on the list. Obviously, I think I'd.
No, I mean, I've got not massive, but I mean, yeah, I mean, my understanding is normally that they will make a bid for the money based on this is arising from this development. There was this need, and they make a bid, and then that's what happens. But it will depend on how the SIL infrastructure levy, the community infrastructure levy, how that's set out. But if it refers to education, then but I need a copy of that, don't I, really? So, but you haven't got anything.
No, I don't think I can add anything further to that, I'm afraid.
But presumably the council's approach is that you feel it should be secured then, or because you've refused it on that basis.
Well, we obviously refused it on the basis that there's a policy that requires infrastructure contributions towards identified infrastructure. The county council obviously are happy with the UU that's been drafted and signed, but obviously if it's felt that it doesn't meet the tests of SIL, then arguably that would warrant, if it doesn't comply with the regulations, then arguably it would fail to meet those tests.
Yeah, well, I think if you can provide me with any details of what I should be referring to then, because I mean, whether the county council seeks to rely upon this draft guidance, or you'll probably have to go back to them, I expect. Yeah, so it may be that we'll need to just deal with it by a sort of exchange, depending if it becomes necessary. Because obviously if I come to a view that it's going to be dismissed, then obviously I won't make a view on it. But
can I just help on one
Yeah.
point, madam? If you go on the council's website and search under SIL, you get a question, what is SIL? And then they set out a heading, the definition of infrastructure, and they set out what Mr. Frost already referred to, definition of infrastructure. Purpose of SIL includes schools and other educational facilities, things like that are mentioned. And then it says the revenue from the levy must be used for supporting the development of an area by funding the provision, replacement, operational maintenance of infrastructure. And then there doesn't seem to be any limitation on what's regarded as infrastructure for the purposes of SIL here.
And it would be liable for SIL. There isn't an exemption, is there, under rural exceptions or affordable housing? So it is a development that would be liable for SIL as well.
Well, it is an affordable housing scheme, so it would be open to put forward a statutory exemption.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
So it could result in a statutory exemption.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's our understanding as well.
Just to draw your attention at section 4 of the unilateral undertaking, 4.2, section 4 deals with conditionality, and 4.2 essentially says that if using the inspector determines in the decision letter that any element contained in the deed is not necessary, then such obligations shall immediately cease and therefore sort of not apply.
Yeah.
So it's open to you under that. The county council have seen that
Yes.
within this drafting.
Okay. So what was your second point then?
But notwithstanding the first point there, obviously this is a rural exception site, and it's providing homes to meet an established need for affordable housing in Stretham and Little Thetford. The residents of the development are therefore not for the most part new people, but they are existing residents, including children perhaps already at school in Stretham or in the surrounding area. So therefore the request for the section 106 contributions fails the regulation 122 tests, because they're neither necessarily directly related or fairly reasonably related in scale, because it's actually education which is already serving the residents who are existing in the area.
But what evidence do I have that the children who could reside in this development in the future are already educated within, that their needs are already met? I don't, do I? Because we don't know who's going to occupy them.
We don't, but there is a cascade. It's a rural exception
There's a
site.
cascade, but equally, you don't know. Just because they've got a local need doesn't mean that they're necessarily living in the local area currently, does it?
No, if you go through the housing needs assessment, it does identify.
Because you could have a connection, so they could have a
Yes,
connection, they
yeah.
could work in the locality and things like that sometimes, isn't there? I haven't read the nominations agreement, but
So, but for the most part, it's dealing with an explicit and identified local need. So the residents who would be living in this development are not ones from outside of the borough or from
but
another
with
area.
where they are living currently, that could then be occupied, couldn't it? So
Yes, yeah, there is a knock-on element from that.
did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think as you say, there could be people with local connections that aren't currently living in the settlement, I guess, for whatever reason. And notwithstanding, people may want to get a house and obviously grow as a result of that. So they may not be placing demands at the moment, but the housing will in the future.
Okay. Was there any other points?
Not specifically.
So I think, as I understand it, you want me to come to a view as to whether the contributions are necessary, given that there is a SIL infrastructure charging schedule in place, which you think would adequately cover.
Yes,
that. So you can't have it, you couldn't have it both ways, even though you then apply for the exemption. That's separate, because it's like,
yes,
is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's the 122 regulations which prevent development which could or should be covered by that. There is nothing to ring fence those contributions, so you can't have it both ways.
I think it was just one observation, is that the SIL list includes the Witchford Household Recycling Centre, which would be the catchment for this development in terms of waste and recycling, and the county council identified that they weren't seeking contributions to that. Now, whether that, I don't know the specific reasons, but that may well be because they understand it's on the SIL list and therefore would be a sort of focus for SIL contributions.
Yeah, I think it's understanding where this list fits in. There must be some more kind of explanation, like this must be attached to that. I don't know what you'd call it, SPD or whatever the charging schedule is, because this list must link back to that. There must be something that says, but like you say, I don't think it necessarily means you can't have other things. Okay, it's something I'm going to have to go, because to be honest, this is something that I wasn't aware was going to be raised, really, so I haven't kind of looked into it or got my head around it all, to be honest. So I'll have a look at it. I think if you can provide any other, I don't know what the right word is, it's the list, isn't it? There's like a document that goes with your SIL charging regime, so there must be something that goes with that list. And if Cambridge want to, I think it would only be fair that, given that this wasn't raised, that we give them the opportunity to potentially just respond on that point that you've raised, that whether or not you can actually, because I don't think that's been put to them, has it? That hasn't been in your evidence. No. So I think that would only be fair, that the council might want to go back to them and just ask them just on that very small point. I'd be happy to deal with that by a submission, and then we can share it if you're happy. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, but other than that, I think you've referenced policy. Just going through the questions that I was going to ask that we normally ask. So about the fact that what were the policy requirements for the instructor contributions? I think that's listed in your reason for refusal, isn't it? Is it growth 2, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Growth 3?
Yeah, growth 3.
I think I've finished it off. I've got that policy right. So that would be in growth 3. And you were happy with the document as drafted, or the county council or the signatory, are they? So they're happy, that's what we're saying, but you're putting it to us as unilateral.
Yes, they're not signatories.
Right.
They're not signatories.
Right, okay. And you're going to send the other document, signed one, that's going to come through. Okay, right. Well, that's all I'm going to ask then, because I think it's just, there's not really, I haven't got enough. I sort of feel like I'm missing part of the documentation that I need to have a look at, really. So you're going to get that to me, and then like I say, I think if you want to go back to the county council on that point that's been raised, and then if you want to feed that back, I'm happy to, you know, to allow some time for that. So, and then we'll just share, you know, or if you just share, that really helps copy everyone in. You've been doing that, so that should be fine. Yeah. Okay. Right. So that leads me on to conditions. So if we just go through the conditions. So I've got Appendix H, which was provided by the council. So, right, I don't know, the two people at the back, are you residents or are you part of this team? You're local residents, right? No, that's fine. I will then let you know. It's just because, so then I'll explain what the conditions are as we go through them. So that's absolutely fine.
Madam, I think she,
They're not residents.
no, Laura may have nodded at the wrong.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So they're part of your team.
Our broader team.
Right, so I don't need to go into extensive detail about each condition. Right, okay, we'll just run through them quickly then. So first one is approved plans, which we've agreed, so that's fine. So you've got a shortened date for commencement here, 2 years. Is that right?
Well, that's one of the points we don't agree with.
Okay, I was going to say, where's that come from? Yeah.
This is not a 5-year supply case, so there's no reason.
And you
for us
weren't putting it forward as a benefit that you were going to deliver it expedited?
I think for us, obviously, we had to submit an action plan as part of the last housing delivery test. We identified one of those actions would be to encourage a more speedier delivery. Yeah. So that's hence that reason. I think also part of the scope for the sequential test for the site, I think also identified this coming forward within sort of 5 years. So I think it was not ruling other sites out because I think they fell outside of that 5-year kind of remit. So again, another reason why we considered that perhaps 2 years may.
But that's not something that you would want to sign up to. You would have a problem with 2 years, do you think?
I doubt we'd have a problem with it, but it's a question of is it necessary? Yeah.
Is it necessary? So in your view, it's necessary in terms of meeting those needs?
Primarily, it was because of the results of our action plan, our sort of, proposals to encourage speedy delivery.
I think if I could just add, Madam, we've already gone through at illustrative stage quite a few design iterations. I'm concerned that there should be a time condition that would encourage further difficulties to be presented.
Yeah, because that condition isn't the one that we would normally use for an outline consent anyway, is it?
No, I have to say that thought had just occurred to me as well. Obviously, I've not really looked at the conditions, but that is a condition that would apply to a detailed scheme. The usual set of conditions that apply to reserve matters schemes are completely different. You have effectively 3 years to put in your RM and then a period of time after approval of the RM to implement. So this condition 2 is in the wrong form, which is probably a broader objection I should have been mentioning.
No, I would agree with that. Actually, I think it's an omission.
Just an error.
Yeah.
So what would you be looking for? You would be saying 2, because what is it normally? 2 years for the submission of reserve matters and 3 years thereafter to implement. Is that what it is?
I think that we could live with.
That would be the standard, wouldn't it? So you would be saying we want longer, a shortened period of time for what, the submission of reserve matters or then the commencement?
I think it's really about commencement in terms of securing that delivery. So a 2 and a 2 would be preferable, but I appreciate the comments in terms of the complexity of the case, which may prove.
But if you've agreed the reserve matters, then you've got the same amount of time to agree the reserve matters. It'd just be you need to get spade in the ground slightly quicker.
Yes. I think I'm less concerned about the second period.
I think if we were going to shorten the reserve matters, I could understand your point. Yeah, okay. So then we've got this is just an archaeology condition, which I don't have any comments on. No. Anyone got any comments on that one? No. Construction management plan. That's fine. No comments on that one. Details of measures, additional surface water during construction. And then you've got a separate condition during construction for surface water drainage at 5. But then you've got your detailed surface water drainage condition at 8.
Yeah, if you require some clarification. So I think so the condition 5 is to sort of prevent pollution and pollution controls during construction, whereas obviously the latter condition is in respect of sort of the actual long-term drainage strategy for the operative part of the development.
Okay, well, it might be something that can be weaved into 4 then, that was all. I think you just have details as part of your construction management plan, couldn't you? Of
Yes,
dealing with surface water runoff
I'd have no
during
problem.
construction, yeah. Okay, contamination, that's fine. Is there any, so what is this one?
Sorry, just
So is there any indication that there is a contaminated, the site is contaminated?
that was
or at
the
risk?
point that we were raising really, is to that there's no indication that there's a need for this condition. There's no past history of the site which would suggest that there's any contamination or any uses that might have resulted in it. And therefore, it
So
doesn't appear
normally we might
necessary.
just put on the one that says if in the event that it is found, then obviously you would then get the reassurance that you would have a survey and a remediation.
Yeah, I think I would
Yeah.
be content with.
So surface water drainage. And all the normal calculations and things. Are you happy with that? There's nothing there that causes you a problem? No. Reserve matters submission should include a scheme to dispose of foul water. Would you need that at reserve matters? I mean, it will avoid further conditions, I suppose. You'd get it all agreed, but I don't know. Do you have any concerns with it coming forward at reserve matters? So 9, we've got with reserve matters, they want foul water and levels, and we'll go on to 11, that's fine. There's a few here that are all wanting to be done at the same time as the reserve matters. So 9, 10, 11 and 12.
I think in principle, so long as we get the 3 years to do all the reserve matters and related submissions, that frankly is quite sensible to have all this together
Okay,
with
that's
the rest
fine.
of the details.
So levels. I think you're in between existing development, so that would seem reasonable, I think. No objections to that? No. Okay, so now we've got a scheme for protecting the proposed dwellings from noise. The schemes will have regard to recommendations. So it shall have regard to the recommendations. Okay, that's just to give you the flexibility, presumably, because there could be changes because of the design. I suppose you're not tying in at this stage to anything you've seen at outline. I'm wondering whether you would want, whether you need to tie, whether we need to make any reference to the dB levels that were set out. Because you're requiring a scheme for protecting the proposed dwellings from noise. It's going to have regard to the NIA, but there's nothing there that means it has to meet the requirements, does it? Is it tightly drafted enough?
I think the question over that was sort of what measurements are we working to,
Yes.
given obviously that there's sort of various measurements that were suggested, going back to the sort of.
So we've got the acoustic design criteria, but then obviously we've had the relaxation of the 5 dB. And then you'd want your 2 allowance as well, wouldn't you, potentially?
Well, I think you don't need to decide that
think
sort of
it's
point
fine?
at this stage. I think it's.
I think as long as the council are content that they would be able to secure sufficient mitigation.
I mean, just as a suggestion, if I may, I mean, would it be easier? Obviously, we're at indicative layouts, indicative design stage. Would it be easier to have a scheme submitted that actually is backed up by another noise impact assessment to understand what those?
I'm
That's
sure
what
we
it
would
was.
do that at RM stage without needing to
I
be
think you'd
asked.
have to, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Because
but it's just
otherwise we wouldn't be able to demonstrate
yeah.
what the levels were and what protection was required at each facade or window. All of that would come. I'd be happy to change the language of this from shall have regard to the recommendations to something like shall reflect the principles of. But
that
I
might
think
be a little bit, yeah.
this isn't the sort of case where one wants to start stipulating in internal levels, because
No,
actually
'cause I think
there's no
two-
disagreement between
No,
us on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's true. Okay. Right, a scheme for biodiversity mitigation enhancement. Again, that's with your reserve matters, but that would tie in with your landscaping anyway, wouldn't it, probably?
Yes.
So that's not linked to any evidence that you've already submitted. In terms of, there's no recommendations in any PEA or anything like that. If you haven't referenced one, so I'm assuming not, that's just a standard.
I think it's been referenced, but in pretty broad terms. And
Right.
we can probably do better with the landscaping scheme that'll end up coming forwards.
Okay, so it might have been covered, but you're saying actually it's better to have it looser because there'll probably be more
Best to have
gains
it
to be
looser,
had.
because then we'll do better.
Yeah, okay. And you didn't have anything about biodiversity net gain in there. It's just mitigation, isn't it?
Well, there was about net gain, but only in very general terms. And I don't think
But there's nothing in the policy to require net gain, is there? That policy just requires mitigation. There includes enhancement, but there's no, you haven't got anything in terms, sometimes I'll see conditions which will say you want a certain % net gain or what have you. You haven't got anything like that.
Not set that out at this time.
No, okay.
And the 10% obviously isn't in.
No, it's
as
not
yet.
in yet. No. No, we have that often the other way around where people want the 10%, but it's not in yet. So that's fine. Fire hydrants, I'm not worried about that. Right. The works as detailed in principle on drawing number shall have been completed. Is that the access? Is that what's shown in principle on that drawing? It's an oddly worded condition. I think that's the access drawing, isn't it?
That is the access drawing, madam. I think that's just a reflection of the fact that when you get to detailed design stage of a new access, there'll be inevitably little tiny tweaks as you try and agree the 278 agreement with the Highway Authority. I think that's all that wording is trying to reflect.
Yeah, that's the intention with that policy.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
keep a bit of flexibility.
Okay, that's fine. Existing access should be stopped up. That's fine. The timing on that's fine within 28 days of the new access. And the access has got to go in prior to first occupation. So there's no issue in terms of establishing the access. I'm just thinking, so in terms of construction works and whatever you'll have in your construction management plan, deliveries and stuff, they're going to use this existing agricultural access potentially. That's fine. And that's what was intended. Okay, good.
I imagine they would, if you wanted to put in something about temporary access and delivery routings in condition.
No, but that was fine. I just wanted to make sure that sometimes on like busy roads like the A10, you might see that the access has got to be in place really before anything else, and then you have your compounds and everything off of the new access. But if highways are happy that that's all fine on the agricultural access, and that's fine, and then it just is, you get 28 days after you've potentially completed the development. Yeah, because it's only 19 dwellings, so it's probably not even going to be occupied in phases. Okay, that's fine. Smiling. Well, that's just for noise. Yeah, that's fine. No gates, fences or walls across the approved vehicle access. Is that even necessary? Why would you put Well, you'd have to have it set back, I suppose.
Well, I'm not sure why we'd do it,
No.
or therefore why 18 is necessary, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we have had occasions where we've had developments where they've become gated developments, and the gates are right hard on the highway. So you end up with a situation where you've got waiting for a gate to swing open while
I think that's why I was thinking normally you have something that says the access will be done in accordance with X and shall thereafter be retained as, so that then it is as it's shown rather than having a gate across or something. Yeah, that's what I was thinking in terms of that in principle condition. Right, okay, and did someone have another condition they wanted to put to me?
Yes, we've got a sort of an initial version of it. Do you want to? I think this has been sent to the council, I hope.
Thank you.
It might need a bit of tweaking on the implementation aspects of it, but I think the intention is to incorporate the principles of the energy and sustainability document, which is essentially code for incorporating passive house principles.
So the sustainable design principles set out in the statement. Right, let's have a look. I've got the statement. So the 5 principles as set out were no thermal bridging, superior windows, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, quality insulation and airtight construction. Is that the principles or is it more wider than that? Because obviously then it goes, the strategy does talk about lots of other things, doesn't it? Or no, well, maybe not. Maybe then that just goes on to talk about that is what it is in detail. So are you I mean, how much of this document are you wanting to be tied, or are you prepared to be tied to? It talks about insulation is made of basalt, a volcanic stone.
That's what I think.
Right, yes, okay. That's what I was thinking. So I think you'd be talking about the 5 principles then, rather than what goes after it.
That's what we.
Okay. Yeah, because what mechanism do you have to, because obviously before, like when we had code for sustainable homes, you could get a certificate, couldn't you, and say, here we go, is there anything like that for passive homes? No. Okay. So will the council ever have any certainty that this condition has been complied with?
Well, I think what we would do is we would put in a design explaining how the principles would be.
So as part of the reserve matters then, you would need to?
Yes, I'm sure it would have to be the same time as that. If the council thought that is satisfactory, not a satisfactory reflection of principles, obviously it's either doing deals. If they think that it is a satisfactory reflection of principles, manifesting them to the extent that it should, if they approve it, and then probably need some text that still should be implemented as approved. That's why I said the implementation, it probably needs to work. And once you've got that, then the council does have to do something.
Yeah, because I think where you've put details of the sustainability and energy strategy, I think that is probably where you need to, it probably needs to say details of how you will adhere to the 5 principles as set out. Yeah. Okay, have you got any views on that? Because obviously,
Yeah, I think that there's sort of just two things on us, is obviously just in terms of passive house principles. You probably want it tightened to a document reference, so that it's,
The principles are set out in the
so that there's no misinterpretation.
in the energy and sustainability strategy, and I think I would almost be minded to list them.
Okay. And then I think the other point for us would be sort of long-term lifetime home. It's delivered. How is it maintained in sort of perpetuity for the benefit of future occupiers, I guess? You know, is it
Well,
in
I
terms
suppose
of,
it's those things like what superior windows. It's like at some point the windows will come to be replaced, won't they? And yeah, I don't know what you then do. The insulation. I mean, things like airtight construction, I don't think that can really be.
No, I think it's
and
just,
some of the principles, it would be difficult for them to be changed particularly, because they'll just be embedded in the fabric or design of the building, won't they? Yeah. Have less good windows. I mean, and it depends on what we've done with the, because what this was, I think this was why the noise condition, I think, is quite was quite brief, I suppose, compared to some maybe I've seen. Because again, the windows, changing the windows would have implications for your noise, wouldn't it? That's right, but sometimes you see a condition which will say they'll be maintained, you know, and that will be maintained, like acoustic glazing and stuff. Because that's what I just wanted to go back to have a look at what we'd said for noise. Yeah, measures. So that would probably protect you from windows then, because there'll be that, even if they come to be replaced, you're kind of covered, aren't you? And I mean, I don't know, lifetime of windows these days is probably. And as well, it's an affordable housing scheme and it's run by a social landlord. So there are slightly different things, because homeowners won't be changing windows, will they? It'll all be done as part of that social landlord. So there's probably less risk, I think, in terms of those incremental changes that you might see. Okay, that's fine. I think that gives me enough to go on, and I can reflect on those. And as ever, it's like I didn't read out that bit that we normally read out, but obviously, you know, I can impose conditions, even if you've agreed on it, doesn't mean that I'll impose it. And obviously I might change the wording, and obviously I'll give you all the reasons. If I was to allow the appeal, the decision will set out why I've imposed the conditions and why they're reasonable, etc. So that's fine. Right, so then that just takes us on to costs. So I think, so it's a response from the appellant, isn't it, on the council's claim for costs, and also whether you want to do any final comments on the council's rebuttal, and then you'll just have to, if you need any time to respond to the rebuttal to your cost claim, we can allow for that as well. So what do I need to have open, documents open, so that I've only got these electronically. So it's the council's response, isn't it, that we're going to look at first? Oh my goodness, right. Okay. So if I first look at the councils. Okay, I've got that in front of me now. So I've got the council's application for a partial award of costs. So if you'd like to respond to that, let me just make a note. Councils. Right, okay.
So, Madam, if it helps, I'll deal with paragraph 9 of the council's document,
Yes.
First, where they say we've acted
Yes.
unreasonably and fundamentally altering the proposal. That's their very short point. And in response, what I say is this: firstly, we haven't fundamentally altered anything. This is an illustrative scheme. We've not sought to amend any of the application drawings. We've added further information, as everybody always does, through the appeal process. And we've done so to respond specifically to the terms of reason 1. The council's position appears to be that we shouldn't be allowed to respond to reason 1 with additional analysis, and that's simply extraordinary and not how the planning system works. So the basis on which they put their application forward is unrealistic and frankly not nonsensical. Secondly, and as I'll go into in a bit more detail in a moment, information specifically engaging with reason 1 and the can you open any windows at the back already was available to the council. And if you just note that for now, I'll show you what I mean by that in due course. So that again is another reason why there's absolutely nothing surprising, let alone unreasonable, about the way the appellant conducted itself. Third point, to get a costs application off the ground, you not only need to show unreasonable conduct, you also need to show that it's caused you costs you wouldn't otherwise have incurred. And of course, that simply isn't the position, and the council, in their desperation to have some sort of retaliatory cost application, has failed to think about that aspect of matters. What if we'd produced Appendix 6 at the application stage? Would the council have agreed the scheme? If so, I hope they'll tell you now, and then your decision letter will be shorter. I suspect what the council will say is what they've said all morning, is, oh no, that's still not good enough, we still need options, and so on. So we'd still be here arguing the toss on whether those points have the remotest validity at all. So in short, the LPA wouldn't have changed its position, proof in the pudding, and not causative therefore of any costs. And finally, what they're seeking are the costs of having to look at Appendix 6. I mean, in reality, we're talking about something utterly de minimis. It'd be more expensive to try and work out what the costs of that were from the council's side. And all of that just shows that the application is without substance on its own merits, and it's purely retaliatory. They obviously wouldn't have made it if they weren't already facing a cost application from the appellant side. So that's what I want to say about their partial application. And then I'm going to try and do this relatively speedily, because you've already got detailed written submissions from me, and we've had the half-day debate this morning as to whether there's any substance in what the council has to say, and you will be forming views on that aspect, and that obviously is the most central aspect of the cost application in any event. The substance and the cost application largely go hand in hand with one another in this case, in particular because of the council's failure to have a think about where it stood once it got the appeal documents. You might, I don't know, think that the council can't be regarded as unreasonable prior to the appeal statement, but there's an obligation on them to review where they've got to and review where they are with any additional information in the appeal statement. And obviously you could say costs as from 2 weeks after the appeal statement or something like that. So that's really the big question. Has there been any reasonable opposition presented as from after they had the appeal statement? And respectfully, you'll form your own view, but we say clearly not. If I can, and say without going through it line by line, because that would take the rest of the afternoon and isn't the best use of time, if I can just sort of chart some big points in response to what the council say on page 2, under what they call refusal reason 1, first reason. That's sort of my first reason, if you like. They set out a whole page of text essentially saying it's all my fault for not having provided Appendix 6 until the appeal process. And I've got a number of observations for you about that line of argument, madam. But first and foremost, that argument does not grapple with what the first reason for a cost award set out in my submissions is. That the first reason is your reason for refusal 1 is a very limited reason. It's an argument that nobody can open any windows. Look at the drafting of it. And it's an argument that once that falls away, as it has now in the statement of common ground, and should have done immediately after receipt of our appeal statement, what is left on your reason 1? Now, where's the answer to that here? You won't find it, and by trying to blame us in some way, it's a distraction and a deflection from the real point, which is what on earth has the council's point been after they realised and accepted in their own heads that their point about being able to open windows not at all as they thought was wrong. Second aspect of that is that the council is wrong as a matter of fact anyway. They haven't been not told the position. Sure, our primary point has always been that it's acceptable in accordance with government policy and guidance to test matters on a closed window basis, because that's what government policy on noise supports, and that's the whole point of Passive House. But it's not the position that the council, in fact, was provided with the Appendix 6 material for the first time in Appendix 6. Now, I accept it was not set out in the helpful way that Appendix 6 sets it out until then, but it was available to the council. Here's how you know. If you go to Appendix C2, this is Mr. Taylor's email on the 11th of November.
Hang on, 20th of October. C2, yeah, 11th of November, yeah.
11th of November. And just to note that this is 6 days before the officer report. And if you have a read of the second paragraph, obviously they've got the noise survey, they've got various noise plots and so on of the site. And the complaint is, at the bottom here, it wouldn't be possible for properties to have windows opened without experiencing internal levels above 35. So that's the complaint. The complaint forgets that in the officer report a few days later, and then throughout the rest of this appeal, the council has accepted the +5 allowance. So what is sought to be done here is to rely on effectively what we all agree is the wrong test. If Mr. Taylor had focused then on the question, can some of these windows be opened and achieve 40 or less than 40, even the material he already had and the plots he already had would have shown him that that was achievable. So the only way this point is made is, as I say, on a wrong factual basis. With all due respect to the council and the difficulties that Mr. Taylor has been in all day, all this really illustrates is the danger of trying to run effectively a subjective noise point, which is the position that the council unfortunately is in. And it's very unfortunate for my client trying to promote a sustainable and affordable scheme that it's had to face this. But there is a difference between different people's individual subjective reactions to noise, which is a legitimate point to make, and subjective application of policy. And here, the policy position is clear. MVHR is an acceptable solution. The government says so. The EHO told the council that twice. The council has still been trying to run an argument based on its effectively subjective application of noise policy without any technical input. And because it didn't have technical input, it didn't ask its EHO whether, on the basis of the noise information it already had and applying the right standard internally of 40, whether it already knew that you would be able to open windows at the back.
Okay.
So there's a lot of deflection, but when you boil down to it, the real essence of what I've been complaining about in the first aspect of this part of the cost application isn't actually answered. A lot of fluff about other things and no engagement with the real point. Okay, the second matter is dealt with in 3.1, and essentially that just goes back, I think.
This takes you back to the officer report, doesn't it?
Yes, but my point, which this is answering, is the logical inconsistency. Are you simply paying lip service to passive house benefits while then saying it's you want to be able to defeat those benefits in order to make a noise argument? And you'll judge for yourself whether you think 3.1 is an adequate answer to that submission. With respect, when you focus on what this is purporting to answer, it doesn't answer it at all. And then what they call the third reason, addressed from 3.2 onwards, essentially the argument they make is, well, noise is subjective, isn't it? But I think I've anticipated and addressed that already. Individual reactions to noise, yes, I agree, those are subjective. And some people will be happy here and some people won't. But application of noise policy shouldn't be a subjective matter. Otherwise you'll never get certainty or clarity on these sorts of issues. That's the whole reason the government has issued policy and guidance saying what it regards as acceptable. And the fourth point over the page, what they deal with in section 4, those are the appeal decisions. And obviously there was a lot of text, I accept, in my cost submission, explaining why none of those were assisted the council for various reasons, either the facts of the case, the particular noise sources, the indications of inspectors saying that they were not going in accordance with now earlier versions of noise guidance, none of which is a sensible basis for future planning decisions. And you can see in section 4 that there isn't really any engagement with or answer to any of that. None of those cases have featured in the argument today, which reflects what should always have been known to the council, that we shouldn't have been made to review and answer all of those points because they didn't add anything material. And indeed, one of the cases, Field End, was it Field End? No. Sorry, it's the British Gas Works one, addressed in 10.3. The council alighted on the inspector listing that 100 units would require MVHR, and they said this is a criticism of MVHR. It shows how unacceptable it all is. Complete misunderstanding of what the inspector's decision was. His decision, as I pointed out at 10.3, was that the scheme in front of him had numerous deficiencies, daylight issues, single aspect, large numbers of schemes of units with single aspect, place-based deficient, and he listed a whole bunch of defects with the design. And then he said, and the council missed this or didn't draw attention to it, but at 56 of the decision, he said none of the above issues are necessarily fatal to the scheme in isolation. So what does that mean? It means, first of all, this doesn't help remotely for our case. It shouldn't have been relied on. But secondly, actually, it's an endorsement of the appeal scheme, because it's the inspector saying, per se, 100 units needing MVHR, I wouldn't have had an issue with if there hadn't been these other points. And then 5 is about internal layouts. And just very, very briefly, we always made the point, internal layouts can be designed to put the habitable rooms at the back. for a planning department, that should have been enough. You ought to be able to look at the overall illustrative master plans and you know, it's obvious really. Of course, you can put the bedrooms and the living rooms at the back and kitchens, studies, bathrooms, and so on at the other side of the building. We shouldn't have needed to draw up plans to illustrate that point. But instead of accepting the blindingly obvious, what the council did in their statement of case was say, oh, this hasn't been demonstrated. I mean, the whole point of outline schemes is that you shouldn't have to demonstrate what's absolutely obvious or should be absolutely obvious to a planning department. And that's what as it were, the fifth reason is. And again, you'll read for yourself what the council says in response, but with respect, none of this is an answer. A complaint about new documents, which is just simply illustrating what should have been the blindingly obvious and shouldn't have been open for any dispute, is not remotely an answer. And then what they call the final reason at section 6, that's my point, that even if there's anything, the remotest scintilla of weight in the council's position here, clearly you've got to put it in the planning balance against all the benefits of the scheme, which we've just gone through. And it's obvious what the outcome of that balancing exercise has to be. And the council was again willfully blind to that particular balance because they thought they had a big noise point. And then they maintained that they had a big noise point, even when the sole objection set out in reason 1 evaporated at their own acceptance. And as I say, we've just been talking around the subject. Well, what is the substantive point that brings us here in noise terms? It's simply impossible to put one's finger on it. And then section 7 responds to what I said about reason 2, which I said in the context of an area which has no locally distinctive features, and given all the mitigation and articulation and landscaping that can be introduced, this really is a make-weight point. And actually what's interesting, despite the discussion we had before lunch, is if you look at 7.3 of their response, they say, while it's accepted that detailed design stage could refine the terrace layout to provide a better understanding of how it may more appropriately sit in the street scene, and then they make a noise point. What's that saying? I mean, this is reverse gear, if ever there was. This is a near abandonment of reason 2 and a recognition that certainly on its own merits, it can be dealt with. So, Madam, for all of those reasons, the response is no response to the costs application. I urge you to make a costs order. As I say, if you want to make it as from costs incurred as from 2 weeks after our appeal statement, I'd fully understand that. And for reasons I gave at the beginning, I'd urge you to reject the council's retaliatory application for costs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So then I think it's just for the council to give a final comment on it, on the rebuttal that you've heard to your cost application.
Yeah, thank you. So I think just in terms of the council's understanding of the constraints and the issues with the application it determined, as referred to in 2.2 of the council's rebuttal, it was clearly set out that windows would need to be closed in order to achieve suitable levels, and that followed the Cass Allen reports submitted with the application at 5.41, which did set out that essentially windows would need to be closed. It would therefore be necessary for residents to close their windows in order to secure acceptable noise levels internally. That was stipulated, and that formed the reason for refusal from the council, because that was very much the position then. Subsequent to that, we've obviously received amended or updated additional evidence in terms of how that noise could be mitigated further, which the council considers is almost an acceptance by the appellant that the refusal reason as set out, refusal reason 1 was accepted, and therefore they utilise the appeal process to try and improve upon that outcome. The council, however, still found and still considers that the reliance on some of the noise modelling, which indicates that even with the 5 dB, there would be, in excess of that being relied upon on some of these habitable rooms, is still not achieving a high standard of amenity. It doesn't consider that's a reasonable conclusion to come to, because essentially that's partially is a subjective matter in terms of what constitutes a high standard of amenity, but also the figures do indicate that there is going to be an exceedance of some of that, some of those critical levels, or could well be, appreciating we're in an indicative sort of approach to the application. I think in terms of the visual impact of the development, that again, having regard, and I appreciate the site visit yet to be undertaken, but having regard to the character of the area, I don't think it's unreasonable for the council to have concerns over the nature of the development, the design, in terms of how that accords with the character of the area. And I think the council has fairly balanced what it perceives to be the disbenefits of the scheme with those benefits, and has made a rational conclusion in its own right, albeit it may not be agreed upon by the appellant. And further to that, I'd have nothing more to add to our comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think everyone's had sufficient opportunity to respond on those. Okay, so as I've already set out, and I don't think I've heard anything to the contrary, that I'll just go and visit the site on an unaccompanied basis. I've got the route to have a look at these other examples, so I can have a look around the village and get an understanding of the character. And I don't think anyone had any objections to that, did they? No. Okay, that's fine then. So it would be helpful to have a copy of the attendance list if whoever's got that. Yeah, you've got that there, brilliant. And then I think the only other thing that would be outstanding now is anything on SIL, the documents. So if they can go to the case officer, and I've asked for the unilateral documents to go to the case officer as well. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, so, and is everyone happy they've said all that they needed to say? Okay, so all it remains for me to do is thank everyone for their time and contributions, and the hearing is now closed. Thank you.